Hi, my name is Eugene. I'm originally from Ukraine and I've been living in Slovenia for many years. I've been fascinated with history and archaeology since my childhood. Welcome to the channel of my project PROSTIR. Through it, I'd like to tell you, people from all over the world, about history of that part of Europe which lies between the Eastern Alps, the Pannonian Plain and the Adriatic Sea, with Slovenia at its center, at its very heart. In this first video, I want to show you something special, a new discovery made this year that very few people have actually seen with their own eyes. Yes, it's already have been featured in the Italian TV program Est of West and on the first channel of Slovenian RTV. But I will try to tell the story in my own way, for all of you who came to watch this video. What are you looking at now is the Karst Plateau. Kras in Slovene, Karzo in Italian. And yes, the very term karst landscape originates here, in the western part of Slovenia. Here you can find many natural and historical landmarks, and there is no shortage of interesting tourist routes. And on the 14th of October this year, an article appeared in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that added 4 more prehistoric structures to the treasury of curiosities on the karst. Structures that for now are quite unique in the whole of Europe. So what are these structures, what do they look like, and what kind of ancient reality lies behind them? The story goes like this. A research team from the University of Ljubljana and the Institute for the Protection of Cultural Heritage of Slovenia, led by Dimitrij Mlekuž Vrhovnik and Tomaž Fabec, has spent 2 years studying the Karst Plateau, carefully analyzing the results of airborne laser scanning, which covered the area of roughly 870 square kilometers. The result of this long and painstaking work, which included also field visits to ground truth the scanning data, was the identification of the remains of prehistoric walls. Today, as you can see, they appear as long ridges of stone, no more than about half a meter high. And they are not just straight walls. Each of these structures has its own specific distinctive shape. The shortest of them, designated K03 in the study, is 530 meters long. The longest one, K01, stretches for more than 3.5 kilometers. The sections you are seeing now belong to this structure. So who built these walls? When? And most importantly, why? I will start by answering that last question. According to the researchers, these walls, which in their original state were relatively low, probably up to about 1 meter in height, were used by ancient people for hunting. They limited the escape routes of wild animals, channeling them into large traps where a group of hunters could finish them off without too much difficulty. Overall, this combination of long dry walls and trap areas reminded the researchers of well-known structures used by prehistoric hunters in the Near East and North Africa, the so-called desert kits. It's also important to note that these walls on the karst are carefully integrated in the landscape. They take into account the positions of ridges and hollows. They were built in such way that the route towards the trap ended at a natural escarpment or a sharp break in the slope, something that fleeing animals could not see until the very last moment. And the trap itself, apart from this escarpment, was enclosed on all other sides by a deliberate and quite substantial combination of natural and man-made barriers. Of course, this brings us to the question of how to date these walls correctly. In the karst region, the transition from a mainly hunting-based way of life to a farming and herding economy unfolded over several millennia between the Mesolithic and the Neolithic. By around the 6th millennium BC, the first farmers and pastoralists appeared in the region. So it would be tempting to assume that these walls were built at a time when hunting rather than herding and agriculture was still the main way of making a living here, in other words, back in the Mesolithic. The problem is that the remains of a dry stone wall built long ago are extremely difficult to date directly. In such cases, archaeologists rely either on artifacts found inside or beneath such a wall, or on organic remains that have managed to survive for centuries or even millennia. And it's precisely these materials can be identified and dated by radiocarbon analysis. In this case, the researchers dated fragments of oak charcoal from a soil horizon beneath one of the probable traps within structure K01, a horizon that may have formed in the period when this hunting megastructure has already ceased to be used. Radiocarbon analysis of these three different fragments produced dates ranging between 1506 BCE and 363 AD. In this context, the earliest date matters most. It marks the beginning of the period of decline, with the time when people stopped using this structure regularly and maintaining it in a good condition. From then on, natural infilling processes began around it, along with episodes of human activity that had nothing to do with hunting anymore. So we can say that K01 certainly existed and was probably abandoned by the Middle Bronze Age, and possibly even earlier. But how much earlier could this story go? Soon we will try to find the answer to this question together. Finally, who could once have built such long walls? How large a community would you need for that? The calculation suggests that in this case the situation is not as dramatic as it might seem. The largest structure, K01, contains around 3000 cubic meters of stone, so building it would require around 5000 man-hours. If we imagine a group of 20 men working on it, and each of them spent around 4 hours a day on this task, they would complete the whole structure in roughly 3 months, even allowing interruptions for rainy days. Of course, a larger group could have done it somewhat faster. This rather simple model clearly shows that such a construction project would have been entirely within the capabilities of a relatively small tribe. However, even such a number of people had to be organized by someone motivated for a shared task and provided with regular, good quality food. After all, the daily work of carrying and stacking heavy stones demands a constant supply of strength. Coming back to the question when exactly were these walls built, it's worth highlighting two key points made by the researchers who discovered these structures. The first point is this: considering the shape of the walls, the integration into the landscape, and the presence of the clear trap areas, it's very hard to argue for any purpose other than hunting. Such structures simply don't fit the idea of ordinary enclosures for grazing domestic animals. So, taking this into account, it makes sense to think of a period when hunting was still a primary occupation in this region. The second point is that such structures could be used effectively only in open terrain, not covered by forest. Paleoecological data from the Karst Plateau shows that open landscapes were preserved there towards the end of the last ice age and in the first millennia that followed, so during the Mesolithic. Later the Karst gradually became forested, and people began to clear this forest more intensively, from the Bronze Age onwards. By the middle of the second millennium BC, in the very heart of the Bronze Age, these hunting structures were most likely already abandoned. So the hypothesis that they were built sometimes between the final retreat of the glaciers and the post-glacial afforestation of the Karst looks quite attractive. This interpretation is also supported by analysis of Mesolithic layers from Grotta dell'Edera, a cave on the Italian side of the Karst, and from the Pupicina cave in eastern Istria. Both sites show a similar pattern. In the Mesolithic from Istria to the Karst, people increasingly focus on hunting red deer, which becomes the hunter's favorite prey. This implies large-scale seasonal hunts, most likely during the autumn rut. And it's precisely for such mass hunting events these large stone structures on the Karst could have been needed. Of course, this doesn't rule out the possibility that these enclosures and traps were built later, in the Neolithic or in the early Bronze Age. Even though in those periods we see a marked shift from a diet based mainly on the meat of wild red deer towards meat from domesticated goats, if we speak only about ungulates. The tradition of occasional large-scale hunts for wild animals could easily have survived among early Bronze Age communities. Such hunts could have been part of certain rituals, which at the same time had very practical aspects. The collective processing of prey, the creation of food reserves, and the feasting that followed would help to discuss and resolve pressing issues of a tribal economy. The redistribution of wealth, the rise of the organizer's prestige, and perhaps even the acquisition of certain power within the small community. In other words, everything that millennia later we would simply call politics. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like it, leave your comment and subscribe to my channel. See you in a few weeks when my next bigger video will come up.